Improvising is one of my favorite things about music. It's challenging, but very rewarding whenever it turns out great. However, since it's improv, we can't guarantee the outcome of our performance, which makes it kind of scary, especially if we're on stage in front of a large audience. But there are ways to practice that can make your improvising more consistently a success. And today we're going to be discussing 5 common chord progressions that you see in abundance of different songs and different types of music. Mastering these progressions by consistent practice over them will almost guarantee that any song you come up against that you need to improvise, you'll know how to do it. I made a backing track for each of these progressions so that you can jam along and practice to them. That is over on my Patreon. The link is in the description below. Also on Patreon, you'll find tons of great lick lessons, pentatonic, shred, legato, alternate picking, some theory lessons. And if you're interested, the link is in the description below. Also, I'll be referring to these chords through the Nashville number system, which is basically just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's how I kind of memorize chord progressions. I think of them as numbers because then you can change keys infinitely with them. You don't have to memorize, oh, it's an A chord to a D chord. You don't do that. It's just 1, 4 or 1, 6 or whatever the context of the progression might be. So everything's going to be using Nashville number system, which I recommend you use as well. The first one I call the classic. This is a 1-4-5 progression, which in C major gives us a C major chord, an F major for the 4 chord, and then a G major for the 5 chord. But you will also see this very commonly played with just power chords like this, which doesn't have really a distinction if it's minor or major. But you will also see this as minor too. So you get like, but it's still a 1-4-5. And probably the most common way of playing a 1-4-5 progression is the 12-bar blues, but I've also seen it in many different ways in country where they're just using the 1, 4, and 5 chords, but they're kind of going in and out different progressions. But I do recommend starting off mastering the 12-bar blues, which is the kind of the backing track that I made as well, because 12-bar blues, you see it in blues, you see it in rock, you see it in country. Some pop songs kind of have a 12-bar blues-esque vibe to it. And so just mastering this is like #1 foundation. As far as soloing over it, this progression could get pretty interesting because if it's a major 1-4-5 like I described here, well, you'd want to use C major in the C major pentatonic scale. Right? But if it's like blues and it's dominant chords, you might want to use C pentatonic. Or you might kind of go what they call like mixolydian, which is basically combining both. So you might get, right? But what if it's all minor chords? Then you're definitely going to want to use the C minor scale. So you will have to be aware of the distinctions that's being played. If it's a power chord, you can kind of do anything. Like if they're just doing just power chords, you can play minor, you play major, you can play anything that kind of really comes to your mind that sounds relatively like the key of C, basically. So have fun with that and spend a lot of time with the 1-4-5 progression because you'll see it so often in so many different genres. Mastering that one is definitely the place to start. Next, I'm going to call this one the Stairway to the Watchtower. The reason why is you find this in the Stairway to Heaven solo, and you also find it in Along the Watchtower and many other songs. I was playing a pop song the other day and they were using this progression. And this progression is a 1, flat 7, and then 6. Minor 6, I should say flat 6, I suppose. And that's gonna look something like this. You've definitely seen this. That's in the key of A minor. Now sometimes they'll walk back up to the G like, but it's still basically the same thing. Sometimes they'll even go down to the E where it's like, still the approach of the soloing is basically the same. I still put them in the same category. You got your root chord, you go 2 frets down, 2 frets down, and you just repeat that. It's very common, especially in rock. Like I said, you can hear it in pop, you hear it in a lot of different contexts, and it sounds awesome. But to approach this, it's pretty much exclusively pentatonic. And then it might go, like I always think of the lick in Stairway to Heaven, is beautifully done. Pentatonic, and then he descends. I'm kind of paraphrasing this lick, but he's got like, he'll do this little maneuver. And he so beautifully hits that F note right when that F chord, that 6 chord, minor 6, flat 6 I should say, comes up. And so you go pentatonic, but this progression definitely allows for that at the right time to beautifully hit the F note, which kind of gives you something like this. Just, you know, what Jimmy Page did in that solo. Sounds great, especially over this progression. So very just minor pentatonic into minor scale. There's not much more going on with this approach-wise. But this is a great progression that you definitely need to spend a lot of time practicing, learning how to come up with different phrases and approach it to gain your confidence while improvising. All right, the next one might be the most popular chord progression in pop music. And when I say the word pop music, I don't mean just like modern pop or whatever. It could be rock, it could be metal, it could be blues, it could be country, it could be modern pop. It's really all that. Even classical music kind of uses it. This is a 1-5-6-4 progression, which means you have a major 1 chord to a major 5 chord to a minor 6 chord to a major 4 chord. And for today, I'm choosing the key of G major for this. So we get a G major, that's our 1. Then we go to D major, our 5. E minor as our 6. And C major as our 4. But you also hear like Green Day use it with just power chords. Right? And then Don't Stop Believin', they're in the key of E major, but they're borrowing the 1-5-6-4 progression there. It's very pop. The chord progression as a whole kind of just naturally tells a great story. And so soloing over it is very melodic and it just tells a beautiful story. Approach-wise, and if going back to the key of G, it's just gonna be G major, all right? And it could be G major pentatonic, G major, just playing those notes naturally. I would start off G major pentatonic probably. And then slowly explore how to tell a better story as the chord progression evolves. So another thing with like soloing is how long a chord lasts in that progression changes how you're going to approach the phrase over it. If it just is like, if it's like that fast, you can't really do anything melodic over it. You kind of just, what's the root of the key, and you kind of just play a bunch of notes over it. But I really like when this progression's like kind of rings out. Something like that, it really allows you to just sit there and just... You can sit there and just be very soulful and melodic with it. I love that. But you can also just jam over it and it sounds fantastic as well. Now that one's in 4/4. The last one's typically in 4/4 as well. Now this I have seen in 6/8, but in the backing track just go in 4/4 with it because I see it a lot in 4/4. And just practice that and be a little bit more melodic, a little bit more soulful with this one. This one's great. The last one's very rock and roll. It's just kind of let loose. There is a little bit of phrasing in there, but it's so just rock and roll, just kind of let it rip. This one can be that, but it also could be sit back, relax, and tell a good story with your solo. So practice this one, and let's move on to the next one. All right, the next one I'm calling the jazzy one. The reason why, it's got a 2-5-1 kind of built in. This progression is gonna be a 1-6-2-5. Now, diatonically speaking, I'm gonna do this in the key of E major. We get E major to C sharp minor, F sharp minor to B major. Now this one's also very pop oriented. I say jazzy because it's got the 2-5-1, which is gonna kind of allow you to get in that jazz world a little bit. But since we're just playing more diatonic chords, we're not doing any expanded chord voicings, it's very pop. This one's gonna be in 6/8 on the backing track. I hear this a lot in 6/8, also in 4/4, a swung kind of 4/4 jazz style. But I wanted to make it 6/8 because it's got a cool vibe in 6/8. This one, like I said, it's very pop, very melodic, tells a beautiful story. In this, really let the emotion sing. It's got those 2 minor chords back to back, which is great. So you kind of sit in that sad zone a little bit longer, and then it finally pushes your ear back to the resolution, which is great. It's so good to just sit in. And I would just start off, this one's an E, so just start off E major, pentatonic. See what you can do with just pentatonic, and then start slowly adding in the other notes of the major scale. So that one, sit back, relax, enjoy that, and tell a good story. Don't worry about shredding too much over it. All right, finally, the last one, I call this one the simpleton. Reason why, it's very simple, still very effective and worth practicing a whole bunch. This one's gonna be in 6/8 as well. We're gonna go to the key of A major. This progression's just a 1-2. So A major, in this case, B minor. You hear this, if you want to hear this in, like, there's so many songs that uses this, go check out Tennessee Whiskey. So it really happens in context. You have that A chord. And the duration of how long that B minor rings out kind of changes. Nonetheless, you really just kind of approach it A major. Pentatonic usually is what I do for the A major chord. And then on that B minor is when I start really expanding to the A major scale, not just pentatonic. All right, so that's the 5 chord progressions for today. Quick recap. We have the classic, which is the 1-4-5. We have the Stairway to the Watchtower, which is 1, flat 7, flat 6. Then you got the pop one, that's the 1-5-6-4. Then you got the jazzy one, which is 1-6-2-5. And finally, you have the simpleton, which is the 1 to the 2. Now, there is something with the natural number systems that, diatonically speaking, the reason I'm not saying a minor 2 chord or a minor 6 chord is it's kind of implied in the nature. I mean, I probably should write it, but it's implied if you know diatonic chords is the 1-4-5 are major, the 2, 3, and 6 are minor. So that's kind of understand that implication there. But also these can be played power chords, and they can, and they often are in different contexts used in a non-diatonic way, but they're still following the chord progression. So be aware of that as well. In the backing tracks that I've made, I kept them very diatonic to keep them simple, and you can still explore the different horizons with soloing over them. All right, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys back next time.